Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you.
You are not going to believe what happened to me yesterday. But we have to start? Okay.
Oh, don't you know, it's the Bill Arnold Show. It's Bill.
And a warm welcome to the Bill Arnold Show. Let me set the table for what's going to happen today. I'm going to have J. Warner Wallace joining me in just a couple of minutes. And as always, he is just one of my favorite guests. He's a Dateline featured cold case homicide detective. He's retired now, but he used his detective skills investigating the claims of the New Testament and became a believer at 35. He's written, 7, 10 books. I've lost count. They're all great. I have them all in my library. He's also a senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview and an adjunct professor at the Talbot School of Theology at Biola. I'm always just really glad when he continually says yes to come on the show because I know his demands. I know how many people are trying to get his time, and the fact that he is generous and kind and gracious enough to come on the show just makes Wyatt and I very happy. Jim, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. It's a kind of a we were just talking about how it's a trying time for everybody right now, and it's kind of an anxious time. So glad to join you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And just with your experience and your background in law enforcement, I just have a couple of questions because I've been thinking about this a lot. And we all know that there is a lot going on in the news right now. And I don't really want to talk about this so much from a news standpoint or a political standpoint. But I would love to talk about what's going on right now in relation to the Christian perspective. Now, let me just ask you this. As a former law enforcement officer, I would think that if anyone is ever resisting arrest, you take that as a fairly serious safety issue, don't you?
Yeah. So it's almost impossible to talk about this because if we become so polarized, and I always wonder, would this have been possible 15 years ago?
No.
Sure. I mean, clearly we would have been, divided on certain issues. Of course, we always are going to be if we're humans. But I wonder if this kind of extreme polarization, like in our culture, we had this ethos. It may have just been the kind of loose memory of Christianity that you wouldn't say certain things to each other. We wouldn't show that side of ourselves to each other. But I think we've now conditioned ourselves with social media, where we've been able to anonymously just kind of say the darkest things of our soul to each other and not feel like we have to do it face to face. That now when we do come face to face, it just comes right out. It's just there's no filter anymore. There's no civility. The idea that civility is now portrayed as a weakness, as something you're not committed to your cause unless you're willing to say the most vile things in favor of your cause on both sides. And I see this all the time. I have to constantly moderate comments on our social media accounts because nobody can speak civilly to each other. And that's on both sides. I mean, what'll happen is somebody will come out and they'll start to use profanity and a pejorative, it's all ad hominem attacks. And then the other person cannot retain their character. So I see it from both sides back and forth. So finally I'm like, no, this is not the place. I'm just not going to tolerate it. I'm just not going to, we cannot advance these things. And often we do this. I'll tell you what the other thing that social media has done. Social media has said if you can develop the kind of post that gets that kind of hostile interaction where people continue to come back to it, not to watch it, not to revisit the notions that you were talking about, but simply to scream at each other because that's, they left the conversation hanging and now they're going to come back and scream at each other some more. That increases the algorithm. So if you're somebody who wants a big platform, you want the kind of posts that you'll never moderate anything because it turns out that unmoderated anger is what makes you popular.
Mm-hmm.
This is a cancer to having any discussion like we might try to have here. And so I will say a couple of things. The difference you're seeing right now in the city in which you live, you're seeing it's law enforcement, of course, but it's federal law enforcement. It's very different than the kind of actions that we have to take in a local law enforcement setting
Okay.
because local law enforcement officers have a patrol function in which they are ever present in the community 24/7. They don't come in and make a strike. They don't come in and do a search warrant and get out again. Of course, we do search warrants, but we have a presence, a patrol division that puts us in the community all the time. You've got a beat. You work that beat. You're constantly driving in your beat. You're ever present. You have a completely different set of duties than this. This is a very different thing. But there are some places where there are clear overlaps, right? Because any use of force. So why would any officer ever be allowed to use force? Okay. They're biblical reasons. They're the same reasons that are in the Old Testament. One, you have the right to defend your own life. So you can use whatever force is necessary, up to and including deadly force, to stop someone from taking your own life, taking your life. So it's self-defense.
Hmm.
That's not considered murder. That is a justified homicide. It's a biblically justified homicide. It's also in every state in the union, it is a legally justified homicide because you were protecting your own life. That's number one. Two, you can actually take the life. You can use whatever force is necessary, up to and including deadly force, to stop someone from taking the life of an innocent. So if you've got someone on a schoolyard who's shooting kids, you can use whatever force is necessary to stop the next murder. That would not be considered itself a murder. That would be considered a justified homicide, as it is in the Old Testament and as it is in all of our states in the Union. So the only time that a police officer would be justified to do this is if he thinks he, number one, if he doesn't do this, he's going to die. Or number two, if he doesn't do this, an innocent is going to die when he could have stopped it.
Hmm.
So now here's the problem. The problem, of course, is all that gray area about whether or not he was justified. And when I say justified, did he think he was either going to save his own life or the life of an innocent? Was he properly justified to do what he did? And the problem with all of these is that you have to make this decision in a split second. And it's a decision which has a consequence which lasts forever. And it's the thing that separates this kind of first responder from every other kind of first responder, because the other kinds of first responders are not going to be asked to have to use this level of force. And they're not even equipped to use this level of force. They're not even usually carrying a sidearm. But police officers carry that because they have to do those two things. And so then the question becomes in a situation like this is that, okay, number one, does anyone really feel like they're doing one of those two things when they discharge their weapon? Is there an alternative of a lower level of force? Look, those are things that I'm not even going to talk about because I don't think they're that important. The bigger 30,000 feet issues are the ones that are more important. But here's what I do know. I've just learned a long time ago is wait, be patient. It's so interesting. There's a difference between reactions and responses.
Hmm.
So a response has the word, a response, RESPONDONESE, response. It has the root pon, PON. It's the same root word that is in the word ponder. So a response is meant to be thoughtful. It's when you take a second to think through your response. Now, reactions are very different. Reactions are like immediate. Now, it'd be great if, and they come from two different places, by the way. So when you react, that fight or flight, you get your hand up real quick because someone's going to swing at you, and you immediately put your hand up. You're not thinking about it. It's just a reaction.
You're
It's
not
almost like a
pondering it.
biophysical reaction, right? You're not pondering. You're
Hmm.
just reacting.
Hmm.
That comes from the amygdala.
Hmm.
But all responses come from the frontal lobe of your brain. So the question is, how do I get my responses to come from the frontal lobe rather than the amygdala?
Hmm.
Well, the studies show this. It's about adding time. Because if you add time, that response will come from the frontal lobe. But if you don't have time, you are created by God and wired in such a way that you'll just immediately respond to protect yourself. So what you always have in these kinds of shootings where someone's life's on the line are reactions, not responses. Because there's no time to respond. If it's happening the way it's happening, you're like, oh dang, I almost died there.
Hmm.
And you had to use this level of force. I see it all the time. I worked officer involved shootings for years when I was a homicide detective, because our agency, we had to work those OISs, officer involved shootings also. So you got to see what this looks like, right, in real time. that we don't. I wish this is now. Here's what happens: that video then is recorded, and now everyone else who looks at this scenario is not reacting; they're responding because they have the time to think through. But the person who was involved in the shooting was not in response mode. They were because no one can be. You have to be in reaction mode. And there's the problem is that reactions are almost always less reliable than responses. We tell people in marriage resiliency that, hey, if you can move your conversations from just reacting to one another to actually responding to one another, you'll see your conversations go a lot better. Well, this is also true in any kind of use of force. But the problem is that doesn't really happen that way. You can't slow it down. It's happening in real time. Now, so the only question is here is did the officer sense in that split second reaction, did the officer sense that one of those two conditions was happening? He was going to die, or an innocent was going to die. And in the end, it's going to come down to that issue, however this comes out in the end.
Jay Warner Wallace is my guest. And Jim, so when you dealt with cases in your career of people, officers who were involved in shootings, did you speak with them directly? Did you review the case? What kind of committee was involved in processing these events?
Well, it's changing over time, right? This is a moving kind of target because the kind of litigious nature of our culture is going to force certain kinds of changes. So every agency, and remember, this is why I'm talking about local law enforcement. The issues that are facing local law enforcement is different than they're different issues than that are facing federal agencies. And I've always advocated we want local law enforcement agencies to be patrolling our cities. You do not want federalization of law enforcement. I hear this all the time. Well, then we could kind of put guidelines in place that would apply to every local agency. But what you want are local people who live in your neighborhoods, who grew up in your city, who are then going to be policing your city to the degree you can get it. And that's because they understand the ethos, they understand the people. They also are more likely to be accountable to their communities. There's lots of reasons why you want local, and this is why when the Constitution was written, 10th Amendment, the idea here is that we want to have that kind of police work done at the local level, not federally. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this changes depending on the agency. Now, our agency, when we were doing it, we would have a team of detectives who would come in and work the officer-involved shooting. We would then have the district attorney's office review everything that we're doing to see was he justified or she justified in taking that level of force. And it doesn't always mean, by the way, we would do these in shootings, whether they were hits or misses, or whether they were fatal or they were injuries. Anytime a weapon is discharged in the direction of a citizen, you're going to do this kind of an investigation. So you would do it for all of those. And yeah, you're going to end up interviewing the officers. It's really a hard scenario to do. I'll tell you why, because you have to immediately separate the officers. You want their truest recollection of what happened that's been untainted by any contact with anyone else. Because if it's something that's legitimate, it'll survive, no problem. If it's not legitimate, you want to make sure you do not do anything that would help them get away with a lie. So what you're going to do is, so that means though, is that an officer who's just simply reacting and is not guilty of any crime, he just was reacting to the moment he was in, he's going to get treated a little bit like he's a criminal in the moment, because we are trying to make sure we dot all the I's and cross all the T's. And afterwards, you almost always will talk to these officers who are involved, and they'll say, I hated the way you guys treated us, because we have to make sure that we do all the things we would with the suspect. If we thought the suspect was trying to get away with something, we're going to have to do the same kind of thing in a moment, at least for some short period of time, with the person who's involved in the OIS. And if you feel like, hey, I'm innocent, I was the one who was attacked, why are you treating me like a suspect? We hear that all the time.
I bet.
Well, it's actually in an effort to protect the truth, because that's the most important thing, is to protect the truth. If people think, well, you're trying to protect the officer. Actually, no. If you're doing your job right, you're trying to protect what is true. And then the chips just fall where they may. Now, if the officer is legitimate, has a reason to shoot, protecting the truth actually does end up protecting the officer. So that's what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. So, Jim, when someone is actively resisting some kind of command from an officer, they're fighting back, they're they're pulling away, they're fleeing. You are trained to respond with what? Enough force to overcome that resistance and try to gain control of the situation?
Well, it's not unlimited force,
Oh,
so
I
so
know
it's
that.
appropriate to what it is you're trying
Yeah.
to accomplish, right? So the only way you could use deadly force would be if one of those two conditions are facing you. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you're facing one of those two conditions. So if you're just trying to take someone to jail, you're going to use whatever force is necessary to overcome resistance. But because your life is not being threatened, then you're not justified in using deadly force in
Right.
response.
Oh, yeah. All right. We're going to take a little break. Jay Warner Wallace is my guest. Fascinating conversation. Jim has got a career in law enforcement. And if you have a question or comment for our conversation, please send it over on the text line, 877-933-2484. We'll be right back. It is my deepest desire that you take the very first step of faith by placing your faith and trust in Jesus Christ. If you've got questions about what it means to begin a relationship with Jesus, text the word faith to 41224. Welcome to the show. So glad you joined me today. Jay Warner Wallace is my guest. We are having a little bit of technical difficulty, so we're going to get Jim back on the line as soon as we can. But if you have heard about the big event coming up January 27th, let me remind you, it's going to be Counselors Corner Live, panel of amazing Christian counselors here. Marcus Bachman, Janita Pace, and Todd Mulliken will join me for a gathering here at the Mel Johnson studio. But it's also going to be live streamed on YouTube. So you can watch it live on YouTube January 27th at 5 p.m. And if you want to get more information, you can also go to myfaithradio.com and check it out. And also, if you are just coming into Faith Radio and you're just kicking the tires and you like our station and you like all the programming on it, we want to get to know you a little bit better, you can request a welcome package. You can text the word welcome to 877-933-2484, and we'll send you out a welcome package. All right, I think we got him back on. Jim, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, you know what? I'm so sorry. I don't know why we're having a connection problem today, and luckily we've got it back together again. So I'm going to be very still here and hope it's not my end. I hope it's your end. I hope you're the reason why this is happening, Bill. Not me.
You dropped out right at the time we take a break, so it actually worked out okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I just appreciate your perspective on this, of course. And I always think when it comes to law enforcement, then Wyatt will agree with me that compliance is always the safest path. Even if you believe you're being detained or arrested for a wrong reason, you can figure that out in court, not on the street.
Yeah, well, that's okay. So it's a couple. So let me just, if I can drag you along and make
Please
a shift here for a second.
Yeah.
So there was a really interesting article that came out from the National Policing Institute at the end of the year, like the last week of December, and what it was talking about were these 6 trends that are occurring right now in local law enforcement, and a lot of them apply to what is happening in your city. So I think that and these are realities. This is what's happening in the culture. This is what every cop is going to deal with, what every community is going to deal with, and how we respond is the big issue. And you're getting a litmus test for this right now in your own city. I'd say the first thing they talk about, which I think is really big, is that we are in the midst of this workforce hiring crisis. Right? Since COVID, since George Floyd, especially probably in your city, I'd love to know what the statistics are in Minneapolis, just a bit relative to how easy or how difficult it is to hire police officers. I know that nationally, it's a mess. It's not just that we have this shrinking applicant pool, which we do, that the number of people who are applying are that number is shrinking. But it's not just that. We're losing experience. Experienced officers are leaving. And like, for example, if you were within a couple of years of retirement, or you might have stayed an extra 2 years, there's a good chance now that you're out. You're not even there anymore. Why take the grief? So we are not just having a hard time hiring. We are becoming less and less experienced agencies because the people who are experienced want out.
No,
and
interesting.
they often feel burned out. So the question then becomes like, how do we respond then? Well, I'll tell you that I don't know that there's that many. I'd love to know what the statistics are related to culture in terms of officers. I would suspect that there are far fewer Christians in the ranks of law enforcement than there are Christians in the country, like as far as percentage of population. My suspicion is that it's far less for police officers, although I don't think there's any really great data on this. But I think there's like this rich kind of history of Christian pacifism that makes a lot of people not want to join law enforcement, or they think of the best ministry opportunity they would have would probably be in the pastorate, not in law enforcement. Although Romans 13 calls what we do ministry. The same word that's used for ministers in the New Testament is used for those who are exercising authority, like police officers in Romans 13. But I don't think most people, if you had a choice between those two, why would you become a cop? Right now, especially. So I think we have to kind of ask ourselves this question. Do we have, are we helping officers with the heart issues, right? Because a lot of it is, if my identity is in Christ and I'm serving as a police officer, then I'm less likely to be shaken by public approval or disapproval, right? Because, or even if it's a commendation from your department, I know that I have to put my resiliency in my identity in Christ, not in my identity in my agency or my status in the community. In other words, my identity cannot be locked into my job if I'm a Christian. And that means that I'm less likely to be shaken. And I can see this as an act of service, not to my community as much as it is to my God. So I think that part of the reason why we're seeing this is because we don't hold a Christian worldview. You know, I remember my chief years ago wanted to hire, and he wanted to do advertising to increase our hiring. The advertising all came out like, yeah, we pay well, you can get good days off, we got great benefits. And I thought, wow, we're taking the entirely wrong approach. We aren't reaching the people who would see this as a calling, that would even be willing to do it for less money, because they see it as a calling, that would be willing to do it for even if they suffered criticism, because they saw it as a calling. So I think we have to kind of move and help young officers when they come on the job see this as a calling.
That's really an important distinction, Jim, because I really see it that way too. Who else would want to go do that job and to put their life on the line every day?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is why, if it's not a calling, if you don't feel like this is ministry, then, but here's the problem: if you're not coming at it from a Christian worldview, of course you don't see it as ministry. And you might even, I've heard, listen, we see a lot of police officers in this marriage resiliency stuff that we do who come in and they're not Christians, but they feel like they're called to do this. But I always ask them, well, who's the caller? Like, well, you feel called,
What a great
but
question.
who's calling you?
Right.
Because what's going to happen is, if you think it's your community, trust me, at some point you're going to see they're not calling you anymore. They're asking you to step down.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have to ask ourselves, who is calling us? Let me just go one more step with you, though,
Please.
from this article that was posted. We are going to be asked to come in now and do more kind of like homeland security stuff. And that we're seeing that already. Don't forget, we have the 25th anniversary of 9/11.
Wow.
You see these pressing threats right now that are being reported from all different, everything from like foreign terrorism to domestic kind of rioting, whatever it may be, right? You're going to see a bunch of stuff, and we're going to be asked as local law enforcement to do more. And this is going to be in an area that where we're not trained. Like that's stuff that is usually not our part of our regular patrol duty. And we're going to have to do it in between all the calls for regular service that we're going to get. So I think we're going to be asked to do everything from, like, checking local things to make sure it's safe, doing some additional training to hopefully get better at this. We're probably going to have to be more present at some of the public events that are going to be occurring. And I think we that's another place where it's easy to say, oh, just train more. Just go out and we can figure this out from an organizational perspective. I think it's actually far more spiritual than anyone wants to admit. Because here's what happens. When you get tapped out, when you get overtaxed, the temptation to cut corners is huge. And the reality of cynicism and pessimism, it's just inevitable. I'm tapped out. You're asking too much. But here we are as Christians, asked to do the opposite. Like we're supposed to be able to endure. As a matter of fact, even see hardship as a badge of honor that God gives us because we are doing something that why it's not for the community as much as it is for him. So this idea of a divine calling, here it is again. If you're going to be asked to do way more than you were ever asked to do before, well, then the question becomes, well, how are you're going to ask us to empty all the gas from our tank? So tell me how you're putting the gas back in. What spiritual gas are you going to put in our tanks so that we can endure this kind of thing going forward? And this is a very different kind of job. The first responders are often thought of as what? Fire, police, medical, EMS, but none of those other first responder jobs will ever have to discharge a weapon to protect themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're going to be asking us to do. And that's going to require a strong foundation in something bigger than yourself.
Jim, when you went into law enforcement, you were an atheist. And what was your calling because your dad was in law enforcement?
I had the most selfish reason of anyone to join law enforcement.
What was it?
Well, my parents divorced when I was 3. So my dad, second marriage, he raised 6 kids in a second marriage. And I was an artist. I had a bachelor's degree in fine art. And then I got a master's in architecture, just trying to figure out how am I going to make a living as an artist. There's a reason why we call these guys and gals starving artists, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I knew I couldn't make a living in it. And I had watched my dad raise a second family in it. And because when he left my mom, we were so incredibly financially challenged. We just basically had nothing. I was the only child raised by my mom, who's a hairdresser, and we barely made ends meet. And I just thought, I don't want to be poor my whole life. And I thought I'd like to. My dad seemed like he raised a second family with this. So at 27, I selfishly said, okay, I'm not even sure I'm shaped for this, but I know that we could probably survive financially. And I'm just not a risk taker because sometimes when you're raised that way, you're like, you've got no net. I'm tired of having no net. Civil service sounded like it was probably something that would be attractive to me. So for very selfish reasons, just wanting to make ends meet, I came on the job. Now, God knows everything from the beginning to the end. And all those years of art school and training ended up being the very thing that we used to make these cases visual in front of juries. And I think probably 90% of our success in those cold cases was simply making the case visual. And if I hadn't had all those years pushing a pencil, pushing a paintbrush, whatever it may be, I don't think I would have been able to make those things as visual as we made them. So there was probably a benefit in that training, but at the time it was just selfish. I just wanted to make a living.
Well, did you go to ask Dad, what do you think about me getting into law enforcement?
Yeah, I think he thought, well, I think he knew I could do it academically.
Yeah.
But I'm sure he didn't think I was, and I was exercising, lifting, so the physical aspect of it. But I don't think he probably thought I had the heart for it,
Okay.
the toughness for it. But what happens is the job changes you for better or worse, whether you like it or not. So here's what happens. You go in, you're just an average person like anybody else. It's not like the job is hiring these monsters. But what happens is you're in the job for 10 years and you see so much stuff that it starts to turn you sideways. For a lot of people, it makes them bitter, cynical, don't trust anybody, have no patience for anything. That's not how we started. That's what the job does to you. Now, at the end of that, if you do something stupid, they're like, what are you doing hiring these idiots? No, we hire regular people. And we sometimes turn them into idiots because we put them through 10 years of junk. And then we punish them usually at the end of that.
Wow.
So we have to kind of think about, like, what does the job do to you? That's why I'm telling you, if you're going to ask us to empty the tank constantly, you have to think about what you're going to put back in it. And that's why if you don't do this with a Christian worldview, you will become an angry. And I see this all the time. People retire. What are you going to do when you retire? I'm moving to Wyoming. I bought 50 acres. I'm going to put my house on the top of the hill with a fence around the perimeter and a binocular on the top of the hill in front of my house to watch who's coming in. Okay, what kind of attitude is that? Okay.
Yeah.
That's the attitude of somebody who's been exposed to too much junk for too long and has had no spiritual life at all.
Do you start building self-protective boundaries? Because there's so much junk coming at you, you're just trying to survive.
Oh, absolutely. By the way, and if you don't do that, you make your family miserable.
Right.
So I was really good at that waffle, put it in that little square in the waffle, and then
Mm-hmm.
my private life's going to be on the opposite side of the waffle.
Mm-hmm.
I think I did a pretty good job of that. So I did SWAT operations and all kinds of stuff and never came home and explained any of it to Susie.
Wow.
Like she just didn't need to know. And there's times where I work a case and she wouldn't even know what the details of the case were until she watched it with me on Dateline
Wow. Wow.
because I'm not going to
That's
talk about that at
that's
home.
impressive.
But also, I had 4 kids. So, when I got home, we were busy.
Yeah.
It's not like, I could bring it home because I had a lot of activity at home. So it wasn't like I could really share it at home anyway. But you have to be the kind of person who compartmentalizes and does it really well, I think, in order to. And I see less and less of that, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that generationally we've kind of lost. You cannot be the kind of person where you feel like silence is violence or that words are violence
Mm-hmm.
because it used to be, I'm not sure how it is anymore, but it used to be when we'd be in the academy, your drill instructor would just be yelling at you profanity from the 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. Why is he doing that? Why is he just constantly berating you? He's going to make you immune to offensive language.
Oh, interesting.
And you better be immune to it because you're going to hear a lot of it when you get outside.
I bet.
But I wonder now if that's the kind of thing that will break you, will give you a pause, emotional pause. We're going to be retiring a lot of police officers on medical disabilities just from stress.
Yeah. Well, there must have been a number of nights when Susie said to you, Jim, why aren't you sleeping? Because you must have
Well,
been tossing and turning a little bit with all that was on your plate.
no, I'm telling you, I'm the kind of person who puts it, uh, and I often worry about do I have too short a memory? So because
Mm,
a short memory helps in law enforcement,
right.
but I also know that if I want to know what were we thinking 5 years ago, I got to ask Susie because I have a short memory about everything because I'm always living in the moment. If you can do that, I think you're going to survive better. But I tell you one thing she did tell me, I used to call her before every SWAT entry just to tell her, hey, because if I didn't leave and tell her I loved her before I left, I want to make sure she hears my voice before we do this crazy thing. Because if I don't come out of it, I don't want her to, and I want her to hear me.
Right.
And so she used to tell me at some point, she said, stop calling. Don't do that anymore because then you can't talk to me for another 6 hours and I don't know what's going on. Just do it. Call me when it's over. Or how about this? Just don't leave the house without, without making the whatever statement you want to make to me. Make it before you leave the house, but
Right.
don't call me before some crazy thing.
I'm a big fan of you and Susie. We're going to take a little break. Jay Warner Wallace is my guest. If you have a question or comment, let me know what it is. You can text it over. If you're interested in getting some more information about what Jim is talking about, 877-933-2484. We'll be right back. Welcome to the show. Jay Warner Wallace is my guest. You can learn more about him at coldcasechristianity.com. Again, that's coldcasechristianity.com. Jim, I got a comment. I'm sure Mr. Wallace is familiar with the law of unintended consequences, and I think that's something as a society we fail to grasp. So when we publicize this anger and resentment and hatred towards law enforcement officials, even if it's only in one state or 2 or 3 states, it will negatively impact the other 47, where people will just see that and go, well, I don't want to become an officer. And so that's going to be that unintended consequences, which then, as you guys touched on, results in a low applicant pool.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And you see this when you serve the national law enforcement community, right? When we're doing marriage resiliency, this is open to anyone around the country
Mm-hmm.
who is struggling after a critical incident and they want to come up and try to kind of recover their marriage. Well, you get to meet people who are working both in big agencies, in urban areas, and in more rural agencies in the country. And so you see the difference is really striking. And so we often you're seeing some of these probably happening in a large urban area, and it has an unintended consequence on every single person in all these other agencies, for most of whom are not going to experience anything like that because they're just a different kind of agency, a different kind of place they're policing. It's very different, but it becomes like this general perception. And this is what I always say, it's hard, right? Because we know that of all the first responders that are out there, no one's trying, like I think I talked to you about this before, no one's trying to defund the fire department. No fireman feels compelled to wear a mask because they're afraid they're going to be doxxed, or their family is going to be attacked because someone's going to try to identify them, figure out where they live, and go do harm to their family. I mean, this is the kind of thing that now law enforcement feels is necessary. I'll give you an example of this. Here in California, just passed a law that agencies, police officers cannot wear masks when they do their job. Well, the only reason why they're wearing a mask is because the unintended consequence of vilifying the police department is that now you see personal attacks on police officers. And because they're afraid that they're going to be attacked personally, not on duty, but off duty because they're being identified and they're publishing their home addresses, publishing all this information that's available about them. That's the kind of thing that it causes law enforcement officials to want to wear a mask to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, now look, all of us, the first level, this is why local law enforcement, it's so important, because if you're working in your local city where you live and you've got a nameplate with your name on it, we want to be as transparent as we can possibly be. Do you remember the old show, that Mayberry RFD, right? That the old,
My favorite.
where you got a town sheriff that everyone knew personally. There's no place to hide.
No.
If you're the town sheriff. Now, of course, the bigger the agency, the easier it is to hide. And so in the end, this is all so much of what we're talking about is the stuff that happens as you slowly move away from a Christian worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever thought about this, for example? There's like this sense that if we had cameras everywhere, right? Like, oh, the cameras will capture the truth. Well, it used to be that we held a worldview that said that there was a God who saw everything, like a camera recording the truth.
Yeah.
There was no place to hide because it's not like you were worried about, well, am I going to be recorded? You had a sense, well, yeah, I'm being recorded in the book of life. I mean, God knows everything I'm doing. I'm not answering to the person holding a camera. I'm answering to the God who sees everything. I just can't help but believe that we'd be in a very different place if all of us had this common worldview that we could return to, that would say, hey, you're not really just responsible to each other, although you are, but you're responsible to me, the God who created you. I do think that if you knew, that everyone in your agency was a police officer, at least you would know how to call them to the next step, because you know they ought to always be called back to bending their knee to a holy God. So I just think we can do ourselves a favor. And one of the things we always try to do when we're doing marriage resiliency is I often will say, I can give you the tools that'll help you in your marriage. But the best thing I can do for you is to introduce you to the tool maker, because that's going to change everything.
Mm-hmm. Jim, tell people a little bit more about this marriage resiliency conferences that you are a part of in the summers.
Well, it's through both Billy Graham Association and Samaritan's Purse. So Samaritan's Purse has got properties in Alaska that they use, for example, to Operation Heal Our Patriots, which is marriage resiliency for veterans, wounded veterans, a different program. So what we started to do is they asked for me to get involved a little bit, because BGA, Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, has a huge heart for the people who are kind of in the bullseye, wherever that might be. So if you're a fireman, a police officer, if you're in EMS, if you're an emergency room nurse, these are the kinds of people they know their tanks are being emptied and they want to refill them. So they have a heart to do this. And when they started doing it with law enforcement, I just happened to be serving in the Operation Heal Our Patriots side for wounded veterans. And so I got kind of drawn into doing this marriage resiliency, and now we do it 6 weeks a year. And so if you are listening to this on the national level, we always are looking for people who are coming out of agencies where they really feel like they have no support. And so although we get people who come out of small agencies with huge Christian base who have huge support, because there are places like that in the country, we really are looking for the people who are struggling because they've got no support and they don't even know Jesus, and no one they know in their small sphere of influence knows Jesus. Those are the people that we think that we can introduce to the toolmaker and see a huge change in their life.
That's beautiful.
And by the way, you can learn more about this. I've got a website, thethinbluelife.com.
Okay.
Thethinbluelife.com, and you'll see the top banner is for the Billy Graham Association Marriage Resiliency Retreat.
Nice. All right, Jim, here's another question that came in. My son-in-law is a detective on the Metropolitan Police Force. His life has been threatened too many times to count. Would you please ask Jim to speak to what a normal citizen can do to make their interaction with the police as safe and simple as possible for everyone involved?
Well, there's some kind of small things you can do and some big things you can do, and some things are take more time than others. Of course, we want to be encouragers because that part of what happens is that a person who's discouraged operates differently every day than a person who's encouraged.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to have a sense that there's because we suspect that there's probably a silent majority out there that doesn't hate us, doesn't want us dead, but they're silent. So the first thing we have to do is flip the narrative. We have to not be the silent majority. We have to be the vocal majority. I think we are in the majority. I think most people, even people who are in neighborhoods that really are suffering under higher rates of crime, also want the police there, want the police to reduce crime. And so I think that we are actually more embraced than we think we are. But it's because that people are afraid to say that, especially in a climate where right now, if you were to say that, you could be targeted. I mean, even if you're simply just a supporter of law enforcement, you could be targeted.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a scary environment for a lot of people. But the first thing is we've got to move from being the silent majority who supports police to the more vocal majority that does, because that's going to encourage officers, and people who are encouraged, they simply behave differently. It doesn't mean they have bravado and they're now acting outlandishly, but it means they are suffering less mental distress, and they have also less physical somatic relationships to mental distress. So that would be the first thing. Second thing, I think we have to make a decision. Do we want patrol officers to do proactive police work? There's no patrol division in the fire department. We don't expect firemen to drive around looking for the next fire, but you expect police officers to drive around and actually reduce crime because of their very presence. But the problem, of course, with that is that police officers put themselves at risk. Now, at legal risk, because what if they do something that could be challenged, or they get a personnel complaint and now they've got a package full of personnel complaints because they're the most active, proactive police officer, and nobody likes to be pulled over, even to be asked, what are you doing out here at 2 a.m? Nobody likes that. So we have to ask ourselves as a society, do we want proactive? Because police officers will be more than happy to stay at the station until you call us, and then we'll just come out and take a report. Or do you want us out there looking for bad guys? Do you want us looking for bad guys? What do bad guys look like? Is that even something we can do? Ask yourself this question. It's been assumed that they will be in patrol cars. What are we driving around doing? Are we just driving around so we'll be close to the call? There are enough substations. We'll be close to the call. No, you want us driving around because you want us to look and stop crime before it starts. Well, that's a risk. And if we don't support that risk, well, then we'd be better just to tell police officers, it's okay. Stay at the station like firemen. Just respond when you get a call. And then you can come out when we need you.
Mm-hmm.
And it won't be very often. And by the way, they'll pay us the same whether we are out there putting ourselves at risk or not. So why in the world would we put ourselves at risk? I think it's going to require communities to support proactive patrol officers, or decide we don't want that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But to do this thing where we're like, yeah, we want you to put yourself at risk, but we won't support you when you make a mistake, because you're inevitably going to make a mistake. You're going to pull over somebody who's just doing something innocuous at 2 a.m., but you think, well, we've had a report of two guys stealing cars, and they were seen driving a white Toyota, and here's 2 guys in a white Toyota. Let's pull them over. What are you doing pulling us over? And now we've got videotape. Now we've got a confrontation, and this thing goes south. Are you going to support police officers who are going to be challenged by doing this kind of proactive work?
Yeah.
That's the longer solution.
Mm-hmm.
That's not as easy. But I think just, first of all, being more vocal, that's the immediate thing we can do.
All right. We're going to take a short break and be right back. Jay Warner Wallace is my guest. Go learn more about him at coldcasechristianity.com. We'll be right back. We carry each other's burdens. Please know you can bring us your prayer concerns, and we will pray. Share your prayer requests with the Faith Radio team by texting or calling 877-933-2484, or share your prayer requests with the Faith Radio staff and listeners
at myfaithradio.com.
My guest today is J. Warner Wallace, and some great comments are coming in. Jim, here's one. Please pass on to Jim my sincere gratitude for his service in law enforcement and his support to those who are currently serving. I agree that many, many people support the police.
Oh, that's encouraging to hear.
Yeah, very nice.
And I think that they're correct. But I also think that we have to separate out, like, so often when you'll hear anything that feels like it's involving someone in uniform who's got a sidearm, that is attached to us as law enforcement because we are in uniform with a sidearm.
Mm-hmm.
So I see all the time, whatever we're doing in the National Guard, whatever. I mean, there's so many different ways that people serve in uniform carrying a weapon that aren't local law enforcement officers. And there is a difference there. And I only have experience with local law enforcement. I never served in any of those other capacities.
Mm-hmm.
So.
When you were in local law enforcement, did you ever have times when the federal government came in and did something in your state, in your city?
Well, yeah. Well, so I worked in investigations most of my career,
Okay.
right? And I worked homicides most of that time, all that time, really. So that's kind of my experience. Now, were there times where we wanted federal assistance? Yes.
Okay.
And so I had I always think it should come bottom up, not top down. It should come bottom up, not top down. So, for example, with Charlie Kirk, you saw the federal presence was there immediately. My personal opinion is let the locals handle it unless they ask you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they did. For all I know, they did. They said, please help us with this investigation. But most of the time, we always felt like, hey, we have enough staff. We have enough personnel. We don't need any help. We're good. We'll call you if we need you. Now, I have engaged federal law enforcement on several occasions because, like, you have a serial murder case where I got a guy that you're working a case in your city, but he's also killed somebody in Nevada. He's killed somebody in Northern California. So you need the federal agency to kind of come in and coordinate between all of these local municipalities. So that is very helpful. So when you have somebody, because it's not just you. It's not just your case. These serial killers, they'll be in 15 different jurisdictions. Sometimes these jurisdictions don't even know they've got one in a series. But there's a federal agent who is now in charge of the entire series who is working with all 15 municipalities to kind of put the case together. That's super helpful. But for us, it was always we want the request to be bottom up rather, not top down.
Mm-hmm. Jim, do you think things will continue to get worse before they get better, or do you start to see a trend that's getting better or getting worse?
Well, okay, so I always say it this way: the pendulum swings, right? So my dad was deployed to the Watt summer riots. Our agency was not a cause for those riots. We weren't directly involved, but we were close enough where we were asked to come and participate. So it was a tough time. I was during the Rodney King. My agency was not responsible for Rodney King, but we were close enough geographically. We got sucked into that mess. Then we have George Floyd. So every generation is going to have probably something like this. And when you're in it, you think, oh, it's the end of the world. You stop and think, though, no, actually, my dad had his, I had mine, my son has his. It's a pendulum that swings. But Here's the problem, Bill. The pendulum is sitting on a table that is starting to slant. So it's going to swing way out further to the edge because the table's slanted. Mm-hmm. It's a tilted table. And then when it swings back, it doesn't come back quite as far because the table is tilting. So because the table is tilting, we're gonna see this. We're gonna see, yes, the pendulum will still swing, but it'll swing in a more extreme in the direction of the tilt, and it'll swing back less in the direction against the tilt. So we have to ask and that tilt is occurring because we are slowly moving. And I don't care what they say about the statistics of Gen Z being more interested in the things of God, or maybe going, having a slight resurgence in the church attendance. I think culturally. And Europe shows us this just 15, 20 years ahead of us. We are moving away from a Christian culture. Yeah. And that's the table tilt that we're going to have to get comfortable with.
So true.
And I think that's by the way, that is what we need to change. This is not a structural, government, social, cultural problem. It's a spiritual problem.
Mm-hmm. Jim, thank you so much for doing the show once again. I just love having you on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate you, Bill.
You bet. J. Warner Wallace has been my guest. That's all the time we have. Have a great night, everyone. See you tomorrow.
Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.